I'm joined by Jim Talent, former senator from Missouri, great national security expert. Happy 2020 New Year to you, Jim Talent.
And right back at you.
Thank you, Senator. My New Year's resolution for the show is to spend a lot more time on national security and great power competition, grand strategy and great power competition. I've had Admiral Stavridis and General Deptula on. General Mel Spees is going to join me next hour. So you're the civilian. I want to ask you, do you think our media spends anywhere near enough time on great power competition and grand strategy?
The broad-based media, no, but I don't want that to sound like it's a tremendous criticism of them. I mean, they're covering day-to-day events. This is one of these stories that's hugely important, but on any given day, not so urgent. And the urgent always tends to crowd out the important in the minds of the media.
And by the way, if something breaking happened, it would happen right now. I'd dump Jim Talent, or we'd start talking about if there was another embassy attack, for example, in Iraq. But to set the year up, and when I do this, when breaking news doesn't interfere with it, how do you define grand strategy as a civilian?
Choosing the highest order ends and matching to it the highest order means. I think that's the classic lay definition of strategy. And I think we've seen that in the last couple of years with the Trump administration. They're focusing on great power competition, specifically with China. And what we're seeing on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, and it's actually kind of exciting, is a really substantial revision of the national security architecture so that we can prosecute this competition. Your interview with Admiral Stav on the Space Force is a classic example of that.
Well, to what end? I use the old Nixon definition where he defined the definition of national security as being the ongoing incremental increase of liberty and literacy in a growing number of stable regimes, either inside or allied with the West. Admiral Stavridis this morning said, you got to dump literacy, we've got that, and add something else, and he suggested prosperity. So the new definition, the new objective for America would be the ongoing incremental expansion of liberty and prosperity in a growing number of regimes, stable regimes, inside or aligned with the West. Is that a good summary?
I think it would. I think our ends would include that, but you put your finger on a really important question, which is, okay, and I raised this, by the way, when I testified before this new task force on national security innovation. I said, we need to decide what winning in this competition looks like.
Exactly.
In other words, how do we know what winning is? I guess I would say it is a world where America's sovereign national rights are secure. And I think that probably includes what you're talking about, an international environment. I'm like Gallagher. I don't like to call it a norms-based international order, but an international environment where nations relate to each other basically according to negotiated rules and resolve disputes peacefully, and that is going to be largely a democratic environment.
No, I tried to stress to him. Peter Thiel has this great book, From Zero to One, where he says if you were born in 1945 or 55 or even 65, your life got better every year, whether or not you did anything about it. It just was what happened in America when the great prosperity of the post-war boom hit the boomers. We can't take that for granted. Our kids and grandchildren are not assured that, Jim Talent, and that's why I think we need to focus on grand strategy and national competition.
Yeah, you're right, and I think everybody in Washington is waking up to this. It's a rather surprising but very pleasant development. I mean, a world dominated by China is going to be a very different world where, at minimum, the United States can no longer look forward to prosperity, and I don't think it can look forward to security either. And so this competition is really important. It's important that we win. And I think, again, we're developing an architecture, including a strategy for winning it. And this has been pretty bipartisan, and on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue in a number of ways. So I like what's been happening. I like the Trump administration priorities, and they're doing very well in certain areas, chiefly in the use of economic tools.
We used to have an Andy Marshall. We used to have big thinkers, right. George Kennan. Are they out there now? I think I'm talking with one of them, but is there a place that they gather and do this? And I don't mean the day-to-day National Security Council where our friend O'Brien is managing stuff with Secretary of State Pompeo and Secretary Esper. I'm talking about thinking through this stuff on a regular disciplined basis as opposed to Twitter snark at each other from 500 miles away.
Yeah, I mean, they gather to do this all the time in the National Security Council. Now, when you get our friend Robert O'Brien on, I'm sure he'll be willing to tell you the problem is, again, how can you keep the urgent from always crowding out the important? How can you take the time to think and plan long term while you're also dealing with, let's say, problems at the American embassy in Baghdad? And it's a real challenge for our government. I don't know that we have enough organic institutions in the government to think and plan to step aside from the flow of daily events. But they are there. They're just working very hard.
They're dormant. I think, over like policy planning. We will see. Jim Talent, always a pleasure, Senator. I look forward to many conversations in 2020. If you're not following at Twitter, @Jim Talent.